Welcome back. On Viewpoint today, we have a panel of foreign journalists and their take on the recent opening of the former presidential office of Cheong Wa Dae to the public and the launch of the Yoon administration's Yongsan Era. I have RAPHAEL RASHID here in the studio. RAPHAEL, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I also have LOUIS PALLIGIANO here in the studio, of course. LOUIS, it's good to have you here.
Yeah, thank you very much.
We'll start with you, RAPHAEL. And I understand that you were there at the opening of Cheong Wa Dae to the public on May 10th. What was your personal impression of the presidential grounds, especially the grounds that were previously restricted to the public?
Yeah, precisely. It was a little bit of a surreal moment, to be perfectly honest with you. Like you just said, the grounds had been closed for so long to the public. And I mean, I've been here in Korea for approximately a decade. And even for me, it's almost a bit of a mythical place that was very inaccessible. Even under the Park Geun-hye administration, just approaching the Blue House was difficult, if not a little bit intimidating. And on the day, there was definitely a lot of excitement in the air, a lot of curiosity, and many people, like myself, but many people who have lived in Korea for all their lives were a little bit surprised at the fact that they could finally get to see the Blue House, a place that is a symbol of power and completely inaccessible, and then overnight it just opened up to the public. I think people were very, a mix of emotions. Was
there a particular place within the presidential office grounds that you wanted to see, RAPHAEL?
I mean, if I'm perfectly honest, just taking a selfie in front of the main blue, roof, that was quite something that I've always wanted to do. But just being there, just going through the gates itself was very. I almost had goosebumps walking through the gates.
It was like a surreal experience.
Yeah, definitely.
Then. Right, I see. LOUIS, you also covered the Cheong Wa Dae opening to the public. What was the response, perhaps, of the people you interviewed for your report on Cheong Wa Dae?
I felt a lot of emotion there. I felt like it was very important for the people that this place came back to the public, and they feel lucky to be there. A lot of them said, I can't believe I'm in this place right now. I saw it in the news, I saw it in my history book, and that's where the president, all the past presidents have been working. So I feel very lucky. And it was all the generation. I was surprised about that. Like, it was very mixed people there. They were like very young school students that were there. They were old people also with some flag, waving some flag around. And they were just a little bit disappointed because they couldn't enter the building. In fact, it was closed at that time. So that was the only thing they said. But they was also impressed that for 120 years before in history, it was impossible to go there. And one of them told me that he could access the White House 10 years ago, and he said, it's crazy, it's my country, and I could never visit this place, but I've been to the White House.
Right, I see. And LOUIS, what were your personal thoughts also with regard to the relocation of the top office from Cheong Wa Dae to Yongsan?
I think it's in line with Yoon's circular policy to be more close to the public. And before that, so he told like he want to relocate, and there were other presidents also. It was not a big surprise because Moon Jae-in had the same project before. And we know it's a complicated place. They are very far from their aides. We have in a different building, and also from the press. So through this change, it's a big victory for him because he make it in time. And in time, he can be closer to the people. We can see every day that the press now can talk to him directly when he arrives in his new presidential office. So I think it was a big step and a good victory for him.
Right. And RAPHAEL, for the sake of comparison, do you suppose there would have been a similar level, perhaps, of public interest if, for example, 10 Downing Street or the Elysee Palace decided to move its top office?
Yeah, I think there would definitely be interest, no matter where it is, no matter what country it is, to have the presidential or prime minister's office moving so suddenly. These places are, like I've alluded to earlier, places that are almost mythical, only accessible to the privileged few. So to suddenly have this kind of move of the office that holds so much power, this place of symbolism, will of course attract a lot of attention. And also these places have served as bases for extremely important historical decisions and historical purposes. At the same time, I'm sure with interest you would also have a lot of opposition, be it in the UK or in France or here in Korea. And I think a lot of people would question the motivations behind the move. Why is it necessary? This has been going on for decades, or in the case of the UK, hundreds of years. So if Downing Street were to suddenly move, people would, I think traditionalists would be very upset. And the first question they would ask is why? So if that person is able to convey why the move is necessary and win the hearts of the people, then why not? In this case, Yoon Suk-yeol has said that it is to be closer to the public, to the people. It is still early days. We have to wait and see whether or not moving to the Ministry of National Defense means that he is closer to the people.
Right, it really is in the early days, because it has even yet to have a name, Louis, which is why I tell you about how the shortlist, there is a shortlist for the new presidential office name, and it includes 5 candidates. You have People's Government Office, People's House, you have Itaewon-ro 22, and Min-eum Cheongsa, that is, and Pareun Nuri. From these 5 names, Louis, which suits you? Which name do you prefer and why?
First, I would exclude the People's Government Office and the People's House. I feel it's too classic and a bit long. And I like Cheong Wa Dae because they are Korean name, so it's important for identity of the country and everything. And Itaewon-ro 22, which combines the street address and the year 2022. It reminds me of a shopping center, fashion shopping center a little bit. I cannot relate it to some political power place. And Min-eum Government Office, which derived from Chinese characters that mean people and voice, is a pretty good name, but pretty long. So I work in a newspaper, and I'm always worried about the headline, not make too long title. So that's why we like Pareun Nuri, which can be translated to a righteous world. And I think it's a short name and efficient. But according to a recent survey, people prefer, for the moment, the People's Government Office was the most preferred candidate name.
Right, because in Korean it's actually quite curt. It's 국민 청사, and in English the translation is quite long, but in Korean it's actually quite curt and precise.
Yes.
That's why they prefer it. But you prefer the Korean
Yeah, personally,
name,
yes.
Pareun Nuri.
Yes.
I see. What about you, Raphael? Which do you prefer?
I think I have a bit of a different opinion here. I think that even though we are in Korea and this is going to be a Korean name, we cannot ignore the fact that the name, I think, has to resonate well in English, whether we like it or not. So for that reason, Itaewon-ro 22, I'm not too sure if it would work, and I think it's trying too hard to emulate 10 Downing Street that has a 300-year history, whereas this is just a brand new address, which is also the same address as the Ministry of National Defense. So I'm not too sure if it would be good to share the same address. The other candidates, Min-eum Government Office and Pareun Nuri, I think are too hard to translate or to spell. So if I were to narrow it down, I think we'd come to the People's House or the People's Government Office. I know there is also controversy with those names because they share the same people, Gumin, as the Kuminehim political party, so there might be a bit of controversy. So we'll have to wait and see. I can't say I have a preference at the moment.
Right, and staying with names, Louis, how did the Élysée Palace get its name?
So Élysée, in the mythology, it came from hell, which is quite surprising, but it's a place in hell when heroes and martyrs can have some rest, in fact. So with this world, we make the Élysée field, which is very famous, and it was not so far from Élysée, le Palais de l'Élysée, as we say in French. So they find this name in the 18th century when it was built, but it was changed a lot. Before it was like there were concerts here, it was a museum, furniture, yeah, they were selling furniture there. And then in 1808, under Napoleon I, it became more a place of power, and it has a new name also. In 1848, for the Second Republic, it became the Louis Napoleon Bonaparte residence,
That's a long name.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's like this for quite a long time. And then we have this name Élysée. So first, it was because there was a nearby Élysée field.
I see. Do you suppose efforts to change that particular name would run into a lot of opposition among the French
I think
people?
so. People
Right.
really like it. It's really related to our culture and a place that everyone can identify in Paris.
Right, I see. Raphael, President Yoon Suk-yeol is the first Korean president who is commuting to work. And given this reality, his interaction with the press corps is quite frequent, whether he likes it or not, of course. What do you say are perhaps the merits and demerits of this particular arrangement?
Sure. The new president does certainly seem to appear to be more open, and he interacts with the Korean media. It seems to be on a daily basis when he arrives to work and leaves. And this is definitely a lot more different from other presidents, some of whom have who have actually done the opposite, who have shied away from the media. So if this means being more open and closer to the people, as he says, then I think this is definitely something that we should take in a positive light. On the other hand, we have to be careful about this so-called doorstepping, as Korean media are referring to it as, to make sure that this is not just all for show or just for photo opportunities. I know in recent days the president has been, he's been speaking his mind, which is not a bad thing. He's been using quite direct language, sometimes suggests that these are just personal opinions, whether or not they come with a depth of knowledge. And so some people are debating that this could possibly amplify conflicts rather than resolve them. So I think we need to be careful, and I think the president needs to be careful what he says, because he is the president, everything is on the record, and everything he says and even doesn't say becomes a headline. So we'll just have to wait and see. And as for, he's been very forthcoming with domestic media, perhaps not so much with foreign media at the moment. So it's early days, so we'll have to see how this pans out.
Right, like you said, we'll have to wait and see then. Louis, last week the former US Forces Korea base near the presidential office in Yongsan marked a partial and trial opening as a public park, allowing ordinary Koreans access to lands that had previously been forbidden for over a century. What do you believe are the intentions of the Yoon administration in perhaps allowing the public access to formerly forbidden territory?
I think with this decision, Yoon Suk-yeol wanted to get rid of another symbol and maybe a feeling of confiscation by the Korean people, to give it back to the public, and they will decide with the government what to do with this place. So there will be a restaurant, there will be parks, there will be galleries and things like this. And I think it's totally in line with what he's wanted to do at first with Cheong Wa Dae opening. And at first it was a place occupied by the Japanese during the colony, and then it was the US Army after in 45. So it has never been, even if it's in the center of Seoul, it's been always a place for American Army. And here we are used to it when you live in Seoul, but for people coming from abroad, everything is very surprising to have this military force in the middle of the country. So I think little by little, for the moment, it's a very small portion. He will try to give back this to the people, but there is some issue with contamination right now. So there is a heated debate about how to clean this and who will pay. There is a memorandum, so the US should pay for that, but there's still discussion. People from environmental organization point out that it could be dangerous and unhealthy. So it will be interesting to follow in the coming months what they will do with this.
Right, definitely it will. Raphael, the Yoon administration marked its first month in office last Friday. Now, that being said, what is your evaluation of the new administration's efforts on the diplomatic front thus far?
Yeah, again, I think it's still early days. We're only 1 month into the Yoon administration. He's already had his first summit with President Biden, literally within days of President Yoon's inauguration, reiterating the strengthening of ties between Seoul and Washington. And just the other day, we've seen Seoul Washington and Tokyo agreeing to hold regular drills, including missile warning exercises. But we have yet to see how and when we will see talks in relation to relations between, say, Japan and Korea, or Japan and Korea and China. But the upcoming NATO summit in Spain, which is at the end of the month, will certainly be a diplomatic test for President Yoon, where he is expected to demonstrate his commitment to a rule-based international community. But he will also have to elaborate, or maybe people will be expecting to know where he stands on China and Russia, who are, of course, extremely important partners with Korea. So he's going to have to address these delicate relationships in front of the world to see, especially at a time of growing resentment, say, against China or even Russia with the Russian invasion of the Ukraine.
Right. And Raphael, well, Louis, actually, what do you believe perhaps are some of the assessments that you would have with regard to the new administration's efforts on domestic affairs?
So as I said, it's pretty early to assess this, but we can say right now that with the victory of the Conservative Party at the local election, it gives him, he's pretty free, and it's a good sign for him. Seems like he had a green light from the people. So the Yoon Suk-yeol administration will plan to focus on a domestic level on housing and business regulation. Because maybe of this election, he gave a lot of subsidies to business owners, small business owner. So he's a little bit under 50% right now in the poll. So it's not that bad, because it was someone that, like we call him, like the Korean Trump sometime in the foreign newspaper, because it was a little bit shocking, and he seems to have softened his speech a lot toward feminism and these kind of things, even if there is more male than female in his government and everything, and this seems to all come from a big university and this kind of stuff, is less provocative. So for the moment, it's a pretty good thing, but there is a big issue right now with the strike of the truck driver. And first, he was talking about the government as something we should be less powerful and maybe take a step back with this problem. And he says the labor and the management should deal with it alone. And he seems to have changed little by little, and now he's trying to find a solution. So this first big challenge for him, because it's paralyzed a big part of economy right now, will be very interesting to follow, because he changed his mind, and we will see how much he will get involved into it, and how much the government will try to make the thing better between them.
Right, it is entering its 8th day, and already we are having disruptions with regard to the supply chains here. Raphael, what do you believe are some of the variables then that look to decide the fate of the Yongsan era under the Yoon administration?
Well, I think President Yoon Suk-yeol is, like Louis has suggested, he's going to have to deal with, for example, the housing crisis. This was a variable which I think made many people have strong resentment against the previous government, and one of the reasons for them to specifically vote for Yoon, and he did indeed become president, because maybe of this vote from young people who are hoping that he will resolve this housing crisis, but also rising costs of living in South Korea. Other challenges ahead will, of course, be in terms of his foreign policy, especially in terms of whether or not he will resume dialogue with North Korea, and, of course, the million-dollar question: how to deal with improving the relations with neighboring countries, namely Japan and China. Again, maybe a bit repeating what Louis was talking about just now, but we should not forget that he won by the slimmest of margins, and and it was approximately 50% on each side. And there was a lot of rhetoric that many people criticized during the campaign period that alienated quite a lot of people who specifically voted for the other side not to have Yoon in power. And I think it's important to remember that this is 50% of the country we're talking about. So now that he's become president, of course, there's what he said, there's what he pledged, and there's what he will really do in reality. So I think we have to see past the rhetoric that he said, maybe to gain votes. We have to go past that and see whether or not he represents not just the 50% who voted for him, but represents the entire country, because there is still a lot of division going on.
Which is why the ruling party said they're going to work on taking a humble stance, be hardworking and be very honest with members of the public. Let's end on a slightly lighter note then. Louis, in recent days there's been a bit of media coverage here on the local front with regard to President Yoon's weekend agendas. We have seen him going to watch a broker with his wife this past weekend, going to the department store to buy a pair of shoes. What are your thoughts with regard to such light coverage of the president's plans for the weekend?
Yeah, it starts to look like people news a little bit to see him doing this. And for every little event, there is kind of little scandal all the time. When we see movie, we say, oh, but there is North Korea is sending some artillery missile and things like this. So you have to justify after this. So maybe he will calm down on his public activities, because you have to answer to all the critique all the time. And there is also, he's talking a lot about his dogs these days. We saw a lot of pictures of his wife and his dog. And we compare the fan club of his wife to a K-pop fan club a little bit. So yeah, they're like, he seems not a funny man before during his election campaign, and he seems to be more close to the people. So it's his strategy, and maybe he tried to be like more simple. So through these little activities and with his wife, who alienated some people also before, because she was criticizing journalists and things like this. And yeah, I think he wants to make people like him with his activities.
And hopefully his policies will also get high scores then. All right, Louis, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And Raphael, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.